January 2017, Tepic, Mexico. A black chopper appears over a luxury compound. In seconds, machine gunfire rains down, turning walls into rubble. 12 bodies are left pumped with bullets, including drug lord Juan Francisco Patron Sanchez, H2. Let's check out some tactics Delta Force uses to destroy the cartels.
They are the Army's Tier 1 Special Missions Unit, known as Delta Force, or simply the unit.
Yeah, they go by many names, all of them unofficial.
November 19th, 1977, Fort Bragg, North Carolina. While most Americans are focused on Thanksgiving preparations, something else entirely is taking shape in this military base. A small group of hand-picked soldiers stands at attention as Colonel Charles Beckwith inaugurates a new unit, one that technically doesn't exist. This is the birth of Delta Force, America's ultimate answer to the growing threat of terrorism. But what the cartels didn't know is that this secretive unit would eventually turn out to be their worst nightmare. But to understand Delta Force, you need to understand the man who created it. Colonel Beckwith survived a .50 caliber bullet in Vietnam after doctors had written him off as a lost cause. This guy nearly died from a bacterial infection while commanding British SAS troops in the Malaysian jungle, only to come back stronger. When Beckwith later sat down in this interview to talk about his time in Vietnam.
What kind of fighters are the Viet Cong that you met here?
I would give anything to have 200 of them under my command. They're the finest soldiers I've ever seen.
The Viet Cong.
That's right. They are dedicated, and they're good soldiers. They're the best I've ever seen.
Anyone who was watching could tell the gears were turning in his head. He was convinced America needed something more lethal, a unit composed entirely of experienced operators who could function independently in the harshest conditions imaginable. The Delta selection was designed to find the rarest individuals who already had what it took, and then push them beyond that limit to reveal their true capabilities. But becoming a Delta operator is nearly impossible. First, candidates must already be elite soldiers, typically from the Rangers or Green Berets with years of combat experience. Then comes the selection process that breaks down even the toughest warriors. One of the most notorious challenges would be the long walk, a 40-mile march through mountainous terrain while carrying a rucksack weighing over 50 pounds. As candidates reach each checkpoint, more weight is added to that already crushing load. There is a time limit, but candidates aren't told what it is, so they simply have to push themselves to the absolute limit and hope it's enough. Approximately 90% of the candidates fail this selection, and of those who pass, many more wash out during the grueling 6-month operator training course that follows. One Delta veteran described the foot pain during selection as feeling like he'd been strapped to the rack and someone had beaten the balls of his feet with a bat. Another recalled how his hands tingled from the rucksack straps cutting into his shoulders, restricting blood flow to his arms.
I was bent forward against the weight. It felt like I was dragging a train behind me.
But physical endurance isn't the only thing separating Delta forces from everybody else. These men are some of the best problem solvers in the world, and they can instantly adapt to changing situations, switching gears between lethal force and precision restraint in mere milliseconds. Many Delta hopefuls experience the House of Horrors, a $90,000 complex built to test operators in counterterrorism and hostage rescue scenarios. Now, for decades, the cartels would rule through fear and violence, believing themselves untouchable. But they hadn't accounted for men trained specifically to do the impossible, men who could navigate through pitch-black tunnels to capture El Chapo or conduct precision raids in urban areas swarming with cartel lookouts. Delta Force is the tip of America's spear against the most dangerous criminals on the planet, and while their operations remain largely classified, their impact has been devastating to cartel leadership worldwide, and those skills would soon be put to the ultimate test when they go head-to-head with some of the most ruthless cartel operations in modern history.
Chaotic scenes at the funeral service for Pablo Escobar, drug trafficker, billionaire, killer, but a hero to thousands in his home city of Medellin. The guns that surrounded him in life surrounded him in death, though brandished now by the military that hunted and shot him.
November 1993, Medellin, Colombia. The most powerful drug lord in history sits in a modest safe house, watching the sun set over the city he once ruled as a king. Pablo Escobar, once worth billions and responsible for 80% of the U.S. cocaine trade, is now a hunted man, growing more desperate by the day. This Operation Heavy Shadow is the story of how America's most elite soldiers hunted the world's most notorious drug lord. And for the cartels, it marked the moment they learned that there was nowhere they could hide. In 1989, Colombia, Pablo Escobar was at the height of his power, with an estimated wealth of $30 billion. He'd assassinated politicians, flown up a commercial airliner with 107 people on board, and put a $2,000 bounty on every police officer killed. Colombia was fighting a full-scale narco-terrorist, but when the pressure mounted on the authorities to do something about it, Escobar decided to flee to Bolivia, thinking that would keep him safe. A team of Bolivian lepardos, DEA agents, and Navy SEALs raided a ranch where intel said he was hiding, only to find their coffee cups still warm. They had just missed Pablo and his entourage by minutes. Tired of their failures, the U.S. government then decides to deploy their most lethal asset. Delta Force Commander Jerry Boykin received a call from General Bill Garrison that would change history.
I want you to go down there. Select a few folks to take with you. Keep it small.
Boykin chose his best guys, squadron leader Gary Harrell and operators Joe Vega, Tony Maffness, and Jaque Alvarez for what would become Operation Heavy Shadow. Now, their mission had one critical requirement. They needed to remain invisible at all times, and any of their successes would have to appear to be entirely of Colombian origin. While Harrell and Alvarez established connections with Colombian police, operators Maffness and Vega set up a sniper observation post overlooking the Medellin Valley. From this vantage point, they could confirm intel gathered by aircraft circling overhead.
They had been hunting for him for 16 months. These elite police troops operating from their barracks in Medellin, led by officers whose identity was carefully concealed for their own protection.
Delta transformed Colombia's forces into a lethal weapon. At the army base Tolamaida, 16 Delta operators put 100 Colombian special forces through a brutal 3-week assault course.
And the smuggled tape shows the mercenaries at work, teaching units of Colombia's drug armies how to kill, using the sophisticated weapons and equipment.
The Colombians learned close-quarter fighting techniques developed in the most advanced military unit in the world, preparing them for some high-intensity raids that were about to come. Meanwhile, the intel support activity, codenamed Sentra Spike, deployed Beechcraft aircraft with hidden surveillance equipment over Medellin. These planes were a little different. Their wingspan was 6 inches wider than normal, concealing sophisticated eavesdropping antennas. The technology was revolutionary. ISA operatives used devices that mimic cell phone towers, intercepting Escobar's calls and pinpointing his location to within 200 meters. This was in 1993, when most Americans are just getting used to the idea of cell phones for the first time ever. Yet Delta was already using them to hunt down cartel leaders. The pressure was mounting, and Escobar's world was shrinking. But this time, the gloves were taken off. December 2nd, 1993, Colombian surveillance tracks Escobar to his mother's house in a Medellin suburb. Within minutes, the intel was relayed to Delta operators at Tolamaida, who rapidly prepared the Colombian assault team. The search block moved in, making entry into Escobar's safe house. They chased him up the stairs and onto the roof as he tried to escape. Gunfire was then heard, and Pablo Escobar, the man who had terrorized Colombia for a decade, fell dead from multiple gunshot wounds.
The very first message transferred over the radio was, "Viva Colombia! We've just killed Pablo Escobar."
And just as planned, official credit goes to the Colombian forces. But rumors that a Delta sniper was the one who actually fired the kill shot has persisted for years. But Commander Boykin would later have only one word when asked about these claims:
No.
The truth was, it didn't matter who pulled the trigger. Delta Force accomplished their mission through something more powerful than bullets. They had built a machine that could track, locate, and eliminate anyone, anywhere. It's basically the perfect weapon against cartels. Operation Heavy Shadow changed the rules forever. Pablo's end on that Medellin rooftop made one thing clear to other cartel bosses everywhere: the Delta Force doesn't miss twice, but some guys just don't listen. While Colombia is still cleaning up Escobar's mess, another kingpin was quietly building up his empire in the mountains of Mexico. But this guy wouldn't make Escobar's mistakes. No flashy mansions, no running for office, just tunnels, bribes, and an uncanny ability to vanish into thin air. January 8, 2016, Los Mochis, Sinaloa, Mexico. Mexican Marine Special Forces take position around a nondescript White House. Inside, walk in El Chapo Guzman, the world's most notorious drug lord, and a man who'd already escaped from 2 maximum security prisons is sleeping. The Marines move in with a precision that doesn't come naturally. But why is this strategy so familiar? Kinda looks like America's elite Delta Force, doesn't it? Well, that's because that's exactly who trained them. Operation Black Swan was about to bring down the most elusive criminal mastermind in modern history. El Chapo was pretty much a ghost figure. As Pablo Escobar was craving publicity, El Chapo had a more discreet approach. As the head of the Sinaloa cartel, he controlled a global drug empire worth billions, with operations in over 50 countries. Yet few people had ever seen his face, and his most remarkable talent was just disappearing whenever authorities got close. Let's go to June 9th, 1993. Authorities managed to capture him in Guatemala, and he was sentenced to 20 years in prison. But after serving just 8, he vanished from the max security Puente Grande prison, reportedly escaping in a laundry cart. And for the next 13 years, El Chapo was a ghost. He would move between safe houses in the Sinaloa mountains, protected by an army of lookouts, all carrying encrypted radios meant to conceal their communications. And his network of spies and informants inside Mexican law enforcement meant that raids were compromised before they even began. February 22, 2014. Authorities managed to capture El Chapo again somewhere in Mazatlan, Mexico, and many people thought they were finally able to close this chapter. But they were wrong, because just 17 months later, security cameras at Altiplano Federal Prison capture El Chapo casually walking behind a shower wall and disappearing. Underneath, Chapo makes it through a mile-long tunnel, complete with lighting, ventilation, and even a motorcycle on rails. All of this built under the noses of prison officials. Now, this second escape was the real breaking point. The Mexican government finally accepted what Delta Force has been proposing for years, a joint operation targeting not just El Chapo's organization, but the man himself. Delta operators didn't deploy as combat troops, because that would have been a violation of Mexican sovereignty. So instead, they become the ultimate force multipliers, providing technical expertise, intelligence, and even training that would transform Mexican Marine. Delta would bring a revolution in tracking methods. They stopped thinking of El Chapo as just a target and started mapping out his entire network. Family members, lieutenants, tunnel builders, and even sicarios. Every single connection then became a potential vulnerability. Delta would deploy advanced signal intel systems that could detect and decrypt communications. They would install biometric identification systems and use small, discrete drones to provide constant surveillance of suspected locations. But their most effective tactic was the squeeze strategy. Rather than going directly after El Chapo, they systematically targeted his key lieutenants and security team. Each capture forced him to communicate more frequently with his diminishing inner circle, creating even more opportunities for interception. The walls were closing in. January 8, 2016, Mexican Marines stormed the compound in Los Mochis. Gunfire blasts as El Chapo's lieutenants fight back. 5 of his men die in the intense firefight, while 6 others are wounded. Only 1 Marine is injured. During the chaos, El Chapo does what he's always done: vanishes. The Marines discover a tunnel behind a mirror in a bedroom closet. El Chapo managed to escape into the city's sewer system. For several hours, the Marines are hunting the underground drainage tunnels. When El Chapo finally emerges, he steals a car and tries to escape. The local police spot the vehicle and make the arrest, not even realizing at first who they've captured. Now this time, the Mexican government takes no chances, and within a year, they extradite his ass to the U.S. 2019, after a dramatic 3-month trial that exposed the inner workings of the Sinaloa cartel. El Chapo's convicted on all counts and sentenced to life in prison plus 30 years. Today, he's sitting at ADX Florence in Colorado, America's most supermax prison, where escape is impossible. Now, while kingpins like Escobar and El Chapo would capture headlines, Delta's most effective work against cartels happens in complete darkness, targeting not just the heads of organizations, but the entire networks that keep them functioning as well. That's coming up next. March 4th, 2025, Washington, D.C. The U.S. Capitol building. President Trump steps to the podium. What follows is a declaration of war on the cartels.
They have total control over a whole nation, posing a grave threat to our national security. The cartels are waging war on America, and it's time for America to wage war on the cartels, which we are doing.
With those words, America's approach to fighting the cartels had changed forever. 2 weeks earlier, the administration designated 8 Latin American criminal organizations as foreign terrorist organizations, the same classification given to groups like ISIS and Al-Qaeda. Now for Delta Force, this reclassification is revolutionary. The tools, techniques, and authorities previously reserved for terrorists in the Middle East can now be deployed against cartels. But to understand the significance of this shift, we gotta look back at how Delta's counter-cartel operations have evolved. Early 1990s, Colombia. Hunting Pablo Escobar meant primitive surveillance and basic intel gathering. By the time the 2010s rolled around, they were tracking El Chapo using encrypted communication interception and advanced signal intelligence. But now, in 2025, they're deploying tools that sometimes can seem like science fiction. Delta's biometric ID systems don't just recognize faces anymore. They can identify high-value targets by their cardiac signature, the unique rhythm of their heartbeat, using long-range sensors deployed along smuggling routes. Cartel leaders can change their appearance and use disguises, but can't really change the pattern of your heart. And we have artificial intelligence now analyzing vast amounts of data, anything from financial transactions to communication patterns to even the movement of goods and people, predicting where the cartel's gonna go before they get there. And for the men over at Delta, this usually translates into success after success.
About 29 top Mexican cartel members who have been extradited here to the U.S. That happened last night.
5 days after the president's speech, Mexican authorities handed over 29 cartel leaders to the U.S. in this unprecedented transfer, both in magnitude as well as relevance. Among them, we have Rafael Caro Quintero, the co-founder of the Guadalajara cartel and one of the FBI's most wanted fugitives. This was a direct result of the extraordinary pressure applied by Delta Force's new operational capabilities. You see, behind the scenes, Delta Force is providing intel that makes these captures possible. Intel gathered using their next-generation tracking systems. The Venezuelan gang, Tren de Aragua, has also become a particular focus after members of this group were charged with horrific crimes in the U.S., including the murder of Jocelyn Nungare in Houston. Delta Force began a comprehensive mapping of their entire network. We have social network analysis tools that identify not just direct connections between cartel members, but hidden influencers too. These are individuals who might not hold official leadership positions, but actually control their operations. This allows Delta to target the true power brokers and not just the figureheads. The designation of cartels as terrorists opens up legal authorities for direct action that would have been unthinkable just months earlier. Early 2025, an operation against Sinaloa cartel drug labs used many of these advanced technologies. The mission targeted previously unknown production facilities that had never been photographed and used sophisticated countermeasures to avoid detection. They were located entirely through analysis of chemical purchases and power consumption, combined with drone-based atmospheric sampling that detected trace chemicals associated with fentanyl production. Delta teams practice in digital recreations of cartel compounds, updated with real-time intelligence, allowing them to execute operations dozens of times before the actual raid. And while officially described as advisory roles, Delta Force operators now work directly with Mexico's Naval Marine Special Forces, the only units trusted to remain free from cartel corruption.
With no pilot on board, all of the visuals are captured by a state-of-the-art sensor. MQ-9 Reapers are equipped with Raytheon's multispectral targeting systems, which allow long-range surveillance, target acquisition, and tracking.
American drone flights approved under new security agreements gather intel on cartel operations deep within Mexican territory. The cartels have always been sophisticated organizations, but now they're facing an adversary with resources and capabilities that they can't match. The drug lord who believes his encryption is unbreakable, his identity disguised, and his location unknown may already be visible on a Delta Force operator's screen. You see, for decades, cartels had exploited borders as shields against American law enforcement. But Delta Force doesn't recognize borders as barriers. They see them as just another obstacle to overcome. The shadows where cartels operate are being steadily uncovered, and Delta Force stands ready to strike with unprecedented precision. But while America's war on cartels was evolving into this high-tech battlefield of drones and AI, not all takedowns require such advanced methods. Sometimes, the most significant victories happen in the most unexpected places, like a dusty baseball field, where a routine stop was about to become one of the strangest chapters in cartel history. October 7th, 2012. Progreso, Mexico, a dusty baseball field in Coahuila State, just 80 miles west of the Texas border. Mexican Marines approach a parked car where a man watches the game. When they move in, gunfire erupts, and two men are about to face the consequences of their actions. The Marines take fingerprints and photos, standard procedure for unidentified cartel members, then transfer those bodies to a local funeral home. They had no idea they've just killed Heriberto Lascano, known as the Executioner, as well as the founder of Los Zetas. But then, just hours later, an armed commando storms the funeral home. Men in balaclavas, armed with automatic weapons, order the staff to back away. They then take Lascano's body and disappear into the night. By the morning, when test results confirmed his identity, the Mexican authorities are left with nothing but photographs of a body that they no longer have in their possession. You see, unlike Pablo Escobar or El Chapo, Heriberto Lascano wasn't born into the drug trade. He was trained for combat by the Mexican government itself. At 17, he joined the Mexican Army Special Forces, where he learned advanced military tactics, weapons handling, and counterinsurgency operations. Then at 24, he deserted, taking those elite skills to the Gulf Cartel, where he helped form their enforcement arm, Los Zetas. The Gulf Cartel was no amateur operation. Founded in the 1930s to smuggle whiskey into the U.S. during the Prohibition era, it expanded dramatically by the 1970s, and by the time Lascano joined, it controlled most of the drug trafficking through the Matamoros corridor into America. But it was under this man, cartel boss Ociel Cárdenas Guillén, that Los Zetas was born. Cárdenas Guillén, who would later be arrested in 2003 and extradited to the U.S. in 2007, made a decision that would change Mexico's criminal landscape forever. He recruited deserters from Mexican Special Forces to serve as his personal security detail. Now, what made Los Zetas different wasn't just their brutality, though they pioneered beatings, mass executions, and public displays of dismemberment. It was their military edge that truly set them apart. These guys operated like a paramilitary force with coded communications, specialized units, and tactical operations no other cartel could match at that time. But when they broke from the Gulf Cartel in 2010, that's when they triggered the most violent period in Mexico's drug war. Under Lascano's leadership, the Zetas expanded from the border regions into Guatemala and deeper into Central America. At their peak, they controlled territory in at least 10 Mexican states. The Zetas were the first cartel to diversify beyond drugs. They treated crime like a business portfolio. Protection rackets, kidnapping, extortion, human trafficking, fuel theft, and piracy all became revenue streams. Where other cartels were competing for drug routes, the Zetas simply took control of entire regions, taxing all criminal activity within them.
Acapulco has become Mexico's murder capital due to a merciless drug war between gangs. Workers recover a dismembered body dumped in the middle of the afternoon.
Their terror tactics were calculated. Bodies dumped in town squares, victims hung from bridges, videos of executions, all designed to demonstrate their absolute dominance and paralyze communities with fear. The brutality would reach unimaginable levels, though. One time in 2013, a high-ranking Zeta member murdered a young girl by dismembering her with an axe and then burning her body in front of her parents while saying,
"So you'll remember me."
He then ordered that mother to be killed in a similar way, while forcing the father to watch, and then killed the father as well. Delta Force operators who had hunted terrorists in Afghanistan and Iraq found themselves studying Zeta tactics. The parallels were unmistakable. Where ISIS would use social media to spread fear, the Zetas used narco messages, banners left with bodies explaining why they were killed. Where Al-Qaeda created training camps, the Zetas recruited former military personnel from Guatemala's Caibiles Special Forces. But like many cartel leaders, Lascano lived a double life. In his hometown of Pachuca, he wasn't the executioner. He was a benefactor who built churches and hospitals. In 2010, he constructed the Church of Our Lady of the Lakes, complete with a plaque honoring his donation. The inscription read,
Lord, hear my prayer, answer my prayers, answer me, you who are faithful and just.
This duality, brutal killer and community patron, reflected the complex reality of cartel operations in regions where the government's presence was weak and often corrupt. The Zetas provided what the state did not: jobs, infrastructure, and a twisted form of order. 1 kilometer from the church, Lascano builds himself a luxurious mausoleum in the Edal Pantheon, San Francisco. He clearly expected to die violently and prepared for an elaborate burial, one he would never end up receiving. By 2012, the Zetas started to fracture. The organization split into factions, one side led by Lascano, while the other was his former lieutenant Miguel Trevino Morales, known as Z40. Now, Miguel Trevino Morales was no ordinary cartel member. As a high-ranking Zeta, he controlled more than 200 operatives and was responsible for collecting tariffs at all drug plazas controlled by the cartel. His operation smuggled multi-100-kilogram loads of drugs each week from Mexico to the U.S., and alongside his brother Omar, alias C42, Miguel would eventually rise to the highest level of leadership in Los Zetas, creating a family dynasty of terror. The U.S. government considered the brothers so dangerous that they offered a reward of up to $5 million for info leading up to Miguel's capture. Intel reports suggested Lascano spent significant time abroad, his power ebbing as the organization he created spiraled further into savagery under Z40's leadership. But when the Mexican Marines finally bumped into Lascano at that baseball game, they had no idea who they'd just found. It was only after a fingerprint analysis revealed his identity that they understood the significance of what just happened. But by then, his body was nowhere to be found. The theft of Lascano's remains fueled endless conspiracy theories. People wondered if he faked his death and if he was still out there somewhere. The Mexican government releases photos from the funeral home showing his lifeless body, but the doubt persisted. In reality, the body snatching had a simpler explanation. Los Zetas, founded by military men, maintained a twisted code of honor. They wouldn't leave their leader to be displayed as a trophy by the government. Now, just as they'd stolen bodies of fallen comrades before, they would take Lascano to give him their own burial. Location unknown. Delta Force operators, following the Zetas' demise, saw valuable lessons in their rise and fall. This organization was built on military expertise, but ultimately collapsed from within. Despite all that tactical sophistication, the Zetas lacked strategic vision. Their brutality generated fear, but also united their enemies, both rival cartels and government forces. For Delta, this reinforced a fundamental truth: raw violence, no matter how precisely applied, cannot sustain an organization. The long-time projection of power requires legitimacy and restraint, qualities that the Zetas deliberately rejected. By 2013, Z40 was also captured, and the once feared cartel splintered into competing factions, their territories gradually seized by other criminal groups. Today, the Zetas exist primarily as a brand name, invoked by smaller groups for the sole purpose of inspiring fear, but their military-style approach to organized crime transformed Mexico's security landscape forever. There's no denying that, forcing both cartels and authorities to evolve their tactics. For Delta Force, the lessons of Los Zetas would prove valuable in their future operations against the cartel, and as they developed techniques to dismantle criminal organizations, they paid special attention to former military personnel who might bring tactical expertise to the cartels, just as Lascano had done decades earlier. And this next case on the list proves just how far Delta Force has come since. February 9th, 2017. Tepic, Mexico. The sun is barely up when the military choppers appear in the sky above a fancy house in the middle of this busy neighborhood. And what happens next is something the locals have never seen before. Machine gun fire rains down from the choppers, turning this mansion into garbage within minutes. Drug lord Juan Francisco Patron Sanchez, better known as H2, and 11 other guys are wiped out just like that. This wouldn't be your everyday bust. This was the Mexican military showing off a brand new way to take down cartel bosses who thought they were safe. You see, for years, the Mexican cops had been doing things the old way, rolling up in trucks, setting up roadblocks, or even doing raids that cartel lookouts could spot from a mile away. But with H2, they flipped the script completely. They were watching him for months, and they knew every door and window of his place. They knew which rooms he and his men slept in. They knew that all his top guys would be there together, and it was the perfect chance to take out the whole leadership in one go. What made this one different was using those military choppers in the middle of a city. These are Blackhawks beefed up with extra armor, packed with guns that could shoot through reinforced walls. The kind of walls drug lords like to hide behind. The ground troops moved in first, surrounding the whole block. But they didn't charge in like usual. Instead, they cut the power, jammed all cell phones in the area, and blocked every street, basically trapping H2 and his crew inside. When H2's men started shooting back, just like the military had expected, that's when the choppers went to work. The pilots used night vision gear and exact GPS locations to stay in the perfect spot, despite all the chaos below. And the best part of this plan was that no random bystander got hurt, even though it went down in a packed neighborhood. The military had even studied which way the wind would usually blow to make sure that broken glass and debris wouldn't fly into nearby homes, and each chopper attacked from a specific angle to avoid shooting toward other houses. That's thoughtful. Now, what most people don't know is that for weeks before the raid, special equipment had been picking up and decoding all of H2's phone calls and messages. They knew exactly who'd be at that house and when. Word later got out that American experts taught the Mexican forces how to do this. Delta Force spent months training them on chopper attack moves, originally made for fighting terrorists in cities. And the result spoke for itself. No civilians hurt, no soldiers lost, and H2's whole leadership team was wiped the out in less than 15 minutes. For other cartel bosses watching from their own hideouts, that message was crystal clear. The game had changed. Can't rely on lookouts to spot police cars coming anymore. Can't really feel safe behind those thick walls with your armed guards. The next attack could come silently from above, without any warning. H2 becomes target number 107, crossed off their list. But most importantly, he showed every drug lord in Mexico that their mansions weren't safe anymore. But not every successful operation against criminal organizations requires missiles and gunships. Sometimes the most impressive victories come from something far more powerful than bullets. And that's pure creativity and a lot of guts. Deep in Colombia's rebel-controlled jungle, two choppers descend from the sky. Guerrilla fighters grip their weapons, watching as men in revolutionary gear jump out and flash documents. The FARC guards relax. Just another day of moving prisoners in their decades-long war against the government. Except, this wasn't a rebel transfer. This was Operation Jaque, possibly the greatest con job ever pulled off by a military force. In just a few hours, these rebels would rescue 15 hostages right from under FARC's nose, without firing a single bullet. Now, how the hell does somebody pull off something like that, which sounds like a Hollywood heist movie more than a military operation? Early 2000s, Colombia. The Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, FARC, had transformed from this political movement into a massive criminal empire. With almost 20,000 fighters controlling entire regions, they funded their war through kidnapping, extortion, and drug trafficking. And kidnapping, in particular, was a full-blown industry. The FARC had held hundreds of hostages in jungle camps, broadcasting their voices on rebel radio to prove that they were alive, while demanding astronomical ransoms from desperate families. Their most famous captive would be Ingrid Betancourt, who was seized in 2002 while running for president. Her dual French-Colombian citizenship turned her into an international cause célèbre, with her image appearing on buildings across Paris in protest demanding her freedom.
Fue para decirme, me van a matar, y no me despedí de mis hijos.
But Betancourt wasn't alone. 14 other high-profile hostages were also being held with her, including 3 Americans, defense contractors Keith Stansel, Mark Gonsalves, and Thomas Howes. Their surveillance plane had gone down in FARC territory back in 2003, and they'd been chained in jungle camps ever since.
There was a time that when I slept, I would dream that I was free. That time was only a few days ago. It feels so good to be free here now. All of you.
Being a FARC prisoner meant living in constant terror. Hostages were chained by their necks at night, forced to trek through mountains and swamps whenever the army got close, and threatened with execution if rescue attempts were made. Some even spent more than 10 years in these conditions, watching as their lives disappeared day by day in the green hell of the jungle. The Colombian government tried everything. Military rescues ended in bloodbaths. In a particularly horrific incident, the FARC executed 11 regional politicians at the first sound of approaching helicopters, and negotiations repeatedly collapsed as the rebels made outlandish demands. By mid-2008, President Uribe was running out of options, and that's when his military intelligence team came up to him with an idea so audacious it bordered on insanity. Their plan to trick the FARC into handing over their most valuable hostages voluntarily. Yeah, no gunfights, no assault teams, just pure deception. Colombian intel learned something very crucial. The FARC's top command was planning to consolidate their high-value hostages for a move. This created a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to get them all at once. But only if the plan was absolutely perfect. This operation would require Colombian soldiers to convince battle-hardened guerrillas that they were fellow rebels. They would pose as members of a fake humanitarian mission sent by FARC HQ to transport the hostages for a potential prisoner exchange. The attention to detail was obsessive. Elite soldiers grew their hair and beards for months. They studied hundreds of hours of FARC videos, memorizing their distinctive slang and mannerisms. They even lived with former guerrillas to perfect their revolutionary personas down to the smallest gesture. Then we have American Special Force advisors, helping to craft backstories that could withstand interrogation and train this team to maintain their cover even under extreme stress. The entire operation was scripted and rehearsed like a theatrical production, with each team member practicing every possible scenario. If the FARC suspected anything, even for a moment, the team would be executed alongside the hostages in the middle of enemy territory. July 2nd, 2008, the mission is launched with 2 white choppers painted to resemble humanitarian aircraft. Inside, we have Colombian Special Forces in perfect disguise, some like FARC rebels complete with Che Guevara t-shirts, and others as international aid workers and journalists. They even included a fake hostage to make the scenario more convincing. So when they touch down at the jungle rendezvous, FARC commander Cesar welcomes them without suspicion. The undercover team stays perfectly in character, using revolutionary rhetoric and presenting forged orders, supposedly from the FARC Secretariat. The story was simple, but very effective. They claimed to be transporting the hostages to meet Alfonso Cano, the FARC supreme leader, for a potential exchange negotiation, and incredibly, Cesar believed him. The true moment of tension, though, was when the hostages came out of the jungle. Betancourt and the others had been moved countless times before, and had no reason to think this was any different. The soldiers have to maintain their cover not just with the guerrillas, but with the very people that they're there to save. But as boarding began, an unexpected complication arose. Commander Cesar and his lieutenant want to come along. The team couldn't refuse this without blowing their cover, so they welcomed the 2 guerrillas aboard, knowing this made everything infinitely more dangerous. Once airborne, the operation reached a critical moment. At a signal, the disguised soldiers swiftly overpowered the 2 FARC commanders and revealed their true identities to the stunned hostages. They were finally free.
Inside the helicopter, one of their rescuers in disguise yells, "We're the Colombian army," and
"You're free now."
This man was held for a decade.
10 years later.
This is the moment every dream they dared not hope came true.
The reaction was pure emotional chaos. After years in chains, the hostages just couldn't process what was happening. Some thought this was another psychological torture, but as reality would dawn on them, the helicopter filled with sobs, prayers, and crushing hugs. Betancourt later captured the moment perfectly.
The helicopter almost fell from the sky because we were jumping up and down, yelling, crying, hugging one another.
Operation Jaque succeeded beyond all expectations. No casualties, no gunfire, and 15 hostages rescued. And to top it all off, 2 FARC commanders are now in custody, and the rest of the guerrilla unit left staring at the sky, not realizing what happened, as the choppers become dots on the horizon. The psychological impact on the FARC was devastating. Their supposedly secured communications had been compromised, their command structure impersonated, their most prized captives had been plucked from their grasp, without them even realizing it was happening. It was a humiliation from which their reputation never recovered. For Colombia, it marked the beginning of the end for the FARC's power. Public support for the government surged, while the guerrillas' aura of jungle invincibility evaporated. Defections from their ranks accelerated as fighters lost faith in their leadership. 8 years later, the once mighty FARC would sign a peace agreement and disband as a military force.